To GUI or not to GUI? That is the question. Of course, by GUI, I'm talking about an application's graphical user interface. It's GUI. And when we're installing Windows Server 2022, we get a choice. We can have the GUI one. We refer to this as Windows Server with the desktop experience. We can have the non-GUI one. We call this Windows Server Core. In this video, I'm going to install both installations side by side so you can see the difference. Hello everybody and welcome. Troy here. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a side-by-side comparison of two different installation options for Windows Server 2022. The first will be with what we call the desktop experience. Now, this is the complete desktop environment, complete with Windows Server Manager, and this is a great place for us to learn server management if we're still getting familiar with Windows Server operating systems. Right alongside that, I'm going to be doing installation of Windows Server Core. Now, this is the non-desktop environment. This is the command line environment with a smaller footprint, a smaller attack surface, and a completely different feel. By the end of this video, you'll have two installations, both with a core configuration ready to deploy and play with in a lab or a sandbox environment. Now, as always, timestamps are listed in the video description below. Feel free to jump around to any particular area of the video you're most interested in. Otherwise, stay with me through the whole thing and we'll do this configuration together. Let's take a quick look at my topology. Very straightforward build today. Two virtual machines connected with a private switch running on my Windows 11 client in Client Hyper-V. I'm going to dual stack each with a IPv4 and an IPv6 address, as well as configure a few options associated with its TCP/IP settings, the default gateway, as well as their preferred DNS. By the end of my installation, I should have complete ICMP connectivity between both machines. Great, let's get this virtual machine party started. Now, I'm going to move to Client Hyper-V in my Windows 11 environment. I'm going to right-click on the name of my server. That is my desktop. I'm going to go to New Virtual Machine, and I am going to kick this wizard off. First step is to name my virtual machine. I'm going to call this WinServ-DT, desktop environment. I'm going to select my storage location, and I'm going to move to the next step where I'm challenged with the decision of which generation machine I want. I want generation 2. I'm going to move next and select the amount of memory to allocate to this machine. This is my RAM for my VM. I'm going to select the default for me, which is 4 gigs of RAM. Next, I get to choose my network adapter. I want to choose my private switch. This will isolate my virtual machine from my host environment, but still allow this server to connect with other servers in my virtualized environment. I'm going to move to next and select the default option of my dynamically expanding hard disk, from which I'm going to boot from an ISO image of Windows Server 2022. Now, where did I get that ISO from? I grabbed it from the Windows Evaluation Center, where I can download evaluation copies of Windows Server 2022. I'll put a link in the description below. Next, and finish that wizard. That virtual machine is ready for me to go. I'm going to connect to that VM. Now, before I turn that on, what I want to do is I'm going to build my second virtual machine. I'm going to move back to Hyper-V Manager, and I'm going to right-click on my server name again, another new virtual machine wizard. Next, let's call this WinServ-Core. This will be my server core installation. I'm going to select my storage location, generation 2 again, accept my defaults, which is 4 gigs of RAM for this machine. I'm going to connect this using a private virtual switch. I'm going to hit next. Again, I'm going to accept the default of my dynamically expanding hard drive, move to select the bootable image file, my Windows Server 2022 ISO, next and finish. And now I have 2 Windows Server machines ready to go. All right, let's turn these bad boys on and get that installation happening. I'm going to click the Start button on my Windows Serve DT, my desktop. Now, what I did really fast there, the video probably didn't catch, is I hit Start and I put my cursor inside that black box and I hit the space bar. I needed to catch the boot from the ISO just as if there were a real physical machine, and I wanted to make sure that that boot order got caught properly. I'm going to hit next to accept those default, and I'm going to hit install, and up will come my choice of Windows operating system. You'll see here that by default, I have a choice of two: Windows Server Standard and Windows Server Datacenter. You cannot go wrong with either one. The difference is about licensing. The primary functionality is exactly the same, so in a lab environment, choose either one you want. I'll put a link below that highlights some of the differences between the two editions. So I'm going to go with Windows Standard. Now I have to choose between the standard evaluation version as well as the desktop experience version. This is my WinServe DT. I want that guy right there, which will give my desktop environment. I'm going to hit next and let this thing do its thing. I'm going to accept the terms, of course, and I'm going to select a custom install where I completely wipe this space and install the operating system in a blank hard drive. Now, as that's going on, what I'm going to do is go back to my Hyper-V Manager, and I'm going to open up Windows Server Core, and let's do that same thing. I'm just going to minimize this guy out of the way, and I'm going to do that same install here. I got to catch that boot from CD or DVD. I'm just going to move this guy over here, and you're going to see everything is exactly the same. I'm going to go next, install, and up will come my option associated with my operating system. What I'm going to do is this time I'm going to accept the default, which is the standard evaluation version. And the fact that it does not say desktop experience means server core. I'm going to hit next. It'll give me the same option to accept my licensing agreement. I'm going to go custom, next, and away it goes. Now let's see if we can time some of these things here. You can see my Windows server over here. There we go. I'll try that a little bit. Okay, so you can see here that I started the server core installation much later than the server desktop, but I'm already catching up with respect to this installation. This is a much smaller install. The core is got no desktop environment, which means that the actual features and functionality is going to be much smaller and much less in terms of server footprint. There we go. My desktop environment ready to restart. I'm just going to hit restart here, and I'm going to let my core restart as well. So both of these guys here are starting right side by side, and you're going to see a couple things happen here. I'll go, of course, on this side over here, I've got so on my left side, on my left, is my desktop environment. On, I guess it'd be your right, is my server core. And look at server core. It's coming up really fast here. There we go. So server core here on the right-hand side is all ready to go. So let's do one at a time. So my server core is asking me for an administrative password. I'm going to connect here. It'll change a little bit of my connection here, and I'm going to select OK. So of course I'm doing this with my keyboard here. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to hit all right, and I'm going to type in a password. Okay, so I'm just going to go with a fairly straightforward password, and I'm using the tab key between the two fields. My password is all set. It's applying these settings, and boom, my server core is set. I created an administrative user with server core sitting there ready to go. Let's do the same thing on my desktop. I'm going to move over here. Again, it's going to ask me for a password. Let's do that. Let's use the same password, Troy. There we go. And it's going to do a bit of finalizing, and you'll see that the login is a little bit different. Let's log in now based on that password that I just created, and I'm going to shrink this just a hair so you can see these guys side by side. There we go. So this is my desktop environment. Server Manager comes up as part of my first login. And over here on the server core machine, I'm looking at something we call sconfig, server config. And let's walk through a couple tasks here to configure these things to be ready for our lab environment. Let's start with the easier of the two, which is my desktop environment. And what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to minimize and close this option for Windows Admin Center. I'll make that the subject of a different video. All I want to do is a couple core configurations here to allow me to get these ready to learn from and play with in a lab environment. Let's start off with some of the more common things that I do. First things first, I'm going to click on the local server tab of Server Manager, and you're going to see that I have a little dashboard here that gives me very quick access to a lot of my customary pre-configuration tasks. First off, look at the name of my computer, Win-31FJIM. Blah, 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 blah. It's terrible. I'm going to change the name of this computer. I can do it the Windows 10 way by right-clicking on the desktop, moving to my System tab, and moving down to rename either via this particular setting or moving down toward my Advanced System setting. I'm going to, however, use my Server Manager to do so. I'm going to click on Computer Name, and I am now at my Advanced System Properties. I'm going to change this name to coincide with my virtual machine. I'm going to call this WinServe-DT. I'm going to click OK, and it will prompt me for a restart. I'm going to hit OK, close, and there is my restart. And just take attention to how long this is going to take to restart. Fairly typical as it goes. There we go. I'm going to have to resize my window a hair here. Let's log back in. Great. And I'm going to make this a little smaller here. And now I'm back. So now my machine name should be changed. I'm going to click on my local server, and you can see that change took. Fantastic. Now let's do the same thing over on server core. You can see that the computer name is Win2L405, blah, 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 blah. I don't want that at all. So I can use sconfig to do so. These are my two options. I can use my server configuration wizard, or I can exit this and go to PowerShell. Either one will work. Let's play with some of the options with server config. It's super easy. I'm going to hit the 2 option to select that option on a command line, and it's simply, what do you want your new computer name to be? Well, I want this to be WinServe-Core. Done. It warns me to restart. Yes. It'll reconnect upon restart, and away I go. Now it's looking for my credentials. Now I'm doing this in real time, everybody. Much faster reboot because it's obviously it's a lighter and more efficient operating system. Now I'm back to my server config, and my computer name was changed to WinServe Core. Another configuration that we could do to help prep us for this lab environment is to follow the best practice of establishing our own administrative account. One of the things we typically don't do in production is rely on our built-in administrator account. We typically would set up our own account as an administrator for both monitoring and permission purposes. Let's do that now. Where I want to go to here is something called computer management. And there's 2 ways to get there. I can right-click on my start menu, and you can see I can go to my computer management tab, and this is where I can start playing with my local users and groups. Another way to get there is under the tools menu, this drop down on my local server, and there is my computer management right up at the top, exactly the same snap-in. I'm going to move to my local users and groups. I'm going to select my users tab. I'm going to go new users. Let's build myself I'm going to go T Berg, and I'm going to go Troy Berg, and there's my administrator account. Give myself a password. Great. And I'm going to disable the option to change my password at logon, and I'm just going to hit my create button. There it is. Now, if I right click and go into Troy's properties, you'll see that I am not an administrator. I am simply a user on this computer. I do not have any administrative privileges. I need to give myself an administrative right with respect to some group membership. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go take a look at the groups that are available, and you can see that there is one called administrators. These administrators have complete and unrestricted access to the computer/domain. That's the one that I want. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to these properties. You can see these are my parameters. I'm going to add my newly created Troy and select apply. And now you can see when I go back to users, Troy is a member. of the administrators group. So Troy is an administrator. I could log off from Troy, log back on, and work as Troy as a local administrator. How do I do that same thing in Server Core? Well, look at that right there. I can add a local administrator, and I'm going to simply hit 3 out of my sconfig. I'm going to specify a user, and my user will be tberg. You can see that it's going to not only create the account, but it's going to add them to my local administrator group. And I'm going to go with a password. Done. Now, a couple things are different here. You'll notice that I could add a much more robust description in my desktop environment than I can with Server Core. I can only add a login environment here, and nor did it actually challenge me to confirm the password. So I hope I remember the password that I used, because it didn't give me a chance to retype it. I'm going to hit enter, and now I'm back. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log off this particular user by selecting the 12 option, and I'm going to log off that user, and I'm going to log in with a Control-Alt-Delete. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to escape through. There's my administrator, and I'm going to type in the password for Troy, and now I am logged in as Troy. Lovely. Little sconfig loads up again, and you'll see I've essentially done exactly the same thing on both servers. Now let's talk connectivity. Servers that are not connected to anything aren't always very helpful. So let's add some connectivity to both of these servers. Now, on the desktop server, fairly straightforward stuff. I can move into my network and sharing settings. I could also get through it for a nice, simple, easy way by clicking on the Ethernet option on my local server manager. That takes me to my advanced network and internet settings, where I can see my Ethernet adapter. I'm going to right click on this thing, open up the properties, and you can see now I can assign my IPv4 and IPv6 addresses. Now, what did I decide those were? I'm going to pop back to my topology. You can see for my WinServe DT, I wanted to have an IP address of 10.0.0.1 on a /23, and I'm going to have an IPv6 address of 20.0.1-ACDC::1, of course, on a 64 network. I'm going to minimize this. Let's pop into my IPv4, and again, I'm going to go 10.0.0.1 subnet mask. I selected a /23, so that'll be a .254, and my default gateway was going to be 10.0.1.254. So that's my /23 mask. I'm going to assign my preferred DNS server as itself, because probably this is going to become a DNS server at some point, and I'm going to hit OK, and let's do my IPv6. I'm going to double click my IPv6, move away from my Slack addressing, and I'm going to type in my IPv6 address, ACDC::1/64. I'm just tabbing through the fields, everybody. 20.0.1 ACDC::254, because that's what I selected arbitrarily out of my topology. And my DNS server shall be 20.0.1 ACDC::1. Again, my home DNS will be this particular DNS server. I'm going to hit OK. Those will verify. And I now can go back to my server manager, and let's give this thing a refresh. And you can see that now I have identified the new statically assigned IP settings. Back to Server Core we go. Let's now add some static IP assignments to our Server Core machine to allow us to connect with the other server. Now, what I want to do for this is I want to move away from the server config, the sconfig window, and I want to move to PowerShell. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select 15 out of my option, and you can see that that is going to allow me to leave sconfig, and I'm going to move back to PowerShell via the command line. Now, I know you're probably thinking, uh-oh, maybe I'm not so great with PowerShell. Don't worry, let's walk through a few of these things together. The first thing you're going to notice is that this is a very simple command line environment. Most of the commands that you already know are absolutely usable here, such as ipconfig, telling me that my current auto configuration address is DHCP assigned I need to do some work, I'm going to use the up arrow. You can see that I can use other older commands simply with an up arrow. It has a memory here. I'm going to hit the space bar /all, and I'm going to see all of my IP config information here. Now, let me introduce you to a couple commands that will help you. First thing I'm going to do is type get net adapter. Now, I don't even have to type the whole commandlet here. PowerShell has a tab complete mechanism. So if you get most of the commandlet you're after, tab will complete it. And if tab complete works, you know you're looking at the right actual commandlet. I'm going to hit enter, and you can see that it has discovered there is a Hyper-V network adapter, because this is a virtual machine, with an interface index of 6 to which I can assign an address. And I can sense the panic in the crowd right now. There are some people who are not comfortable with PowerShell. Well, what we're going to see now is PowerShell is simply a series of commandlets and parameters. The commandlet that we're after is new net IP address. And that's the commandlet that's going to allow us to assign an address to that particular interface. Now, there's a series of parameters that come with this. Let me show you a trick that will help you navigate this environment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go out of my server core environment. And what I'm going to do is either look up the command ahead of time, or I'm going to go to my PowerShell environment on my host, which is a bit more forgiving. Specifically, what I'm looking for is the PowerShell ISE, Integrated Scripting Environment. And when I click on this, it's going to open up my particular host-based PowerShell. Now, the reason I like to work here is because of a cool feature inside this particular environment called IntelliSense. Remember, I was looking for the commandlet new net IP address. Let's type that in. New net IP address. Look at this now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this with the tab, and I'm going to hit a space and a dash. And now you can see the parameters that are associated with this really, really easily. Let's have PowerShell guide us. What is the IP address that I want for this machine? Well, I'm going to pop back to my topology. My IPv4 is 10.0.0.2 on a /23. Type that in here. 10.0.0.2 on a next hit. My prefix length right there is a 23. That's the mask. I'm going to hit the dash sign again. Which interface should this address be applied? Well, remember I checked inside my virtual machine. It's interface index 6. Let's go back to PowerShell, and I'm going to type in my interface alias. My interface index 6. That's what I want right there. Now, I've given it an address, a subnet mask. I'm applying it to that interface. What else do I have? I've got my default gateway, cool, which is going to be 10.0.0.1.254, followed by the address family, which has to be IPv4. Cool. Now, that's the bulk of the command right there. This is the whole thing. Can I do this in my server core environment? Absolutely. So what I did, everybody, is I simply attempted to learn my command from a different, more forgiving environment. But let's type this in. I'm going to type in dash new net address dash IP address. And again, my tab complete works. 10.0.0.2 on a prefix length of a 23. That happens to be my subnet mask. My interface index is 6, and my default gateway is 10.0.1.254 space, and I'm going to hit the dash button one more time, and I'm going to type in address family, which is IPv4. That's a 1, IPv4. There we go. And let's hit enter. There we go. I can see now that I have successfully applied a new IP address to interface index 6. And if I do an IP config /all, you can see that I now have a statically assigned IPv4 address to my network adapter inside this particular server. I forgot that I want to do DNS as well. In my server over here, I could actually very easily add a preferred DNS. Well, let's go back to my ISE environment and let's see if there's any commands here that will help me with DNS. I'm going to do a little search here. Ooh, look at these results. This is cool. So now I can see, oh, set client server address. That's the one that I want. Let's back here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here for you. I want set DNS client server address. There it is right there. That's the one I want. Let's get IntelliSense to help me out. The interface index was 6. And what is the server address that I want? Well, according to my topology, it was going to be 10.0.0.1. And that's all I need. I don't need anything else right here. Let's go put that onto my server core. I'm going to go set -DNS client, and I'm going to just hit the tab. There we go. I'm tabbing through until I find the command that I want. There's my DNS client server address. Let's type in my interface index, which was 6, and my server addresses, which was 10.0.0.1. There we go. Let's do a fresh IP config all, and you can see there's my new DNS server ready to go. But I've only done IPv4. Can I do this for IPv6? Yes, I can. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to up arrow, and I'm going to reuse this other command. Let's go back to, I'm just using the left arrow key here, and I'm going to go and very sneakily add my IPv6 address. So this is 2001 ACDC::2. I'm going to move my cursor over here. I'm going to change this, my prefix link from a 23 to a 64. It's going to be the same index, but my default gateway is now an IPv6 address, 2001 ACDC::254. And this address family is now going to be IPv6. There we go. I'm going to hit enter, and now it has taken that command, but I just reused it. Let's do the same thing for my DNS. I'm going to move there, and I'm going to add my DNS server, which was going to be 2001 ACDC::1. Enter. Quick little up arrow to get to my IP config. And you can see now I have successfully assigned 2 new addresses, both my IPv4 as well as my IPv6, as well as my preferred DNS servers. And now the magic question, can we verify connectivity between these 2 servers? Both of them have addresses on IPv4 and IPv6. Let's see if they can talk. I'm going to minimize my PowerShell here, and I'm going to move to my my desktop server. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with a command line. I'm going to open up my command prompt, and I am going to see if I can ping my friend at 10.0.0.2, which is my core server. I'm going to hit the enter button, and I'm not seeing something that I should see. Let's see if I can ping the other way. I'm going to go over to my core server, and I'm going to see if I can ping 10.0.0.1, and I'm going to get a timeout. What's wrong? Okay, well, the problem is the default behavior of Windows Server 2022 is to prevent ICMP echo requests from entering in the environment. What I'm saying there, it's being blocked by a firewall. So how do we fix this? Well, we could turn the firewall off. We don't like to turn off the firewall. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a firewall rule to allow ICMP. Let's move back to my desktop server. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in the word firewall. And what I'm looking for here is my Windows Defender firewall with advanced security. Up will come my rules. This is an access control list filled with access control entries. Now, the best, most granular way to permit specific ICMP is by adding a rule. There are rules here that I can manipulate, but I want absolute control over my ICMP. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow an inbound rule. I'm going to create a new rule. I just hit my little area on the right, and I'm going to create a brand new rule that allows for custom configuration. Next, I want to apply this to all programs, and the protocol that I'm looking for is ICMP v4. Now, the reason that we want to use this is because this lets me get very specific with respect to my ICMP. I'll do a whole other video on how firewalls work with ICMP. You can see there are different types of ICMP that we can control here. Right now, I'm just going to open the door to it all. I'm going to hit next, and you can see again, I can granularly control the sources or destinations associated with these ICMP packets. I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to allow for all three of my current network environments. I'm going to hit next, and I'm just going to simply call this allow ICMP v4. Finish. Now, that is allowing echo requests to enter my WinServe environment. Let me go over here, and I'm going to ask this ping again, and lo and behold, I have a connection. So I have sent an echo request from WinServe Core to WinServe DT, and where it was previously being blocked, this rule now lets it through. Let's look at the other way. I'm going to go ping back. This was a one-way ping. Why? Because my server core machine does not allow ICMP request messages into its environment. Let's fix that. Another fairly easy PowerShell command. I'm going to introduce you to another one, and it's going to be new net firewall rule right there. And this is a really easy one that we can use. What I want to do, let's give it a name. I'm going to call this allow ICMP v4. Cool. What's a display? Let's go with a display name. I'll do the same thing. Allow ICMP v4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use PowerShell to do the same thing I did on my desktop server. I want the protocol, which is ICMP v4, and I want it to allow that inbound from outside that environment. So I need to add one more parameter, which is to what should it do when it receives these packets, and I want that to allow it. This is literally all I need to do. You'll see that I've got a series of other parameters that I can go for more granular configuration, but this is just a test environment. I just want to confirm this connectivity. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to now specify this rule inside my server core environment. Let's move back to my server core. And there it is right here. And I'll bring my PowerShell up here so we can still see it. And I'm going to type in this particular command, new net firewall. I'm going to use the tab. I'm tabbing through. And if you go too far, Shift tab takes you back. And the name of that firewall rule will be allow ICMP v4. I want the display name to be allow ICMP v4. And you can see that I'm just going to go all the way across my newly discovered commandlet, and I want the protocol to be ICMP v4. And I'm going to deal with incoming, so the direction is inbound, and I'm going to type the action to be allow. Enter. That rule was successfully done, and what that means is that I'm going to allow ICMP v4 into my environment. Let's move back over here and see if this ping now works. And it does. We did it. So we have successfully configured incoming connections to both environments. Now remember, both of those servers were dual stacked. We have IPv6 addresses on them as well. The firewall is going to block ICMP on that protocol as well. That's easily done because we can use exactly the same process we just did with IPv4. Whew, that was a lot. Well done, everybody. If you were able to configure all of those elements with me, well done. What you've just successfully done is configured 2 different Windows Server 2022 installations, one with the desktop experience, one with Server Core. Now, the cool thing is with those basic configurations that we did, you were both introduced to the environments, you saw some cool tools, but more importantly, these servers are now ready for further exploration. You could use these as the foundation for adding different roles, experimenting with different features, and seeing what other things you can do with both of those environments. I hope you found that interesting. Best of luck. We'll see you again soon.